My story begins on what most people would consider the holiest day of the year, St. Hubin's Day, a time when the world collectively decides that sobriety is overrated and that celebration is paramount. My wife Tina and I, well, we embraced the spirit of the day with gusto, perhaps a little too much gusto looking back on it now. From what I recall, that night was quite warm, and the sky was clear and full of stars. Tina had always hated stars. Actually, she despised a lot of things like stars, old people, foreigners, old foreigners, and even puppies. Puppies really pissed her off, but she was my wife and I loved her. Around midnight, we decided to take a stumble through the woods while we finished off a bottle of whiskey. Tina was babbling about one of her crazy ideas. She was always coming up with these idiotic product ideas, but never followed up with them. I think that night she might have been rambling about making opioid gummies in the shape of dinosaurs or something, I don't know. I really wasn't listening too closely, I never do. Anyway, as I mentioned before, she never followed through with these things, and I think that was for the best. The moon was full and bright, its light penetrating the forest canopy, casting strange shadows and bathing our path in an eerie glow. As we stumbled and weaved unsteadily through the forest, I noticed Tina's mood becoming more elevated, and so was mine. A sense of well-being infected us, exhilarating in its intensity. Then I recalled that we had consumed a fair amount of mushrooms. This was, and always had been, a traditional part of the holiday, at least in these parts. I credited our newfound euphoria to the overindulgence of this tradition. We were in the middle of one of our heated discussions about something neither of us knew anything about. Sobriety, maybe, or raccoons. Tina hated both of those things, so they were a common subject of debate. Just as she paused the conversation to light a cigarette, it happened. The sky lit up with an annoying glow, and before we could properly slur our disbelief, a spaceship descended from the night sky and landed in a small clearing about 50 yards to our left. It was quite clear to me that this was not your ordinary run-of-the-mill UFO. This was way more cool, real retro-looking, like it came from a 50s movie or something. I looked at Tina in disbelief, searching for some confirmation that she had just seen what I had. Her pupils were the size of dinner plates, and her mouth hung open like a doofus. "Whoa," she said, and I nodded in agreement. Unlikely as it was, I figured that the combination of the booze and the mushrooms may be playing some small part in what I had seen, or maybe it was all the hashish we had smoked earlier, but Tina had seen it too, so I guess it was really happening. Tina's excitement was palpable. She grabbed my hand, her eyes bright with wonder. She wanted to get closer to the craft to see what was going on, and despite my reservations, I knew it would be hopeless to resist her. We staggered quietly through the woods, moving slowly closer and closer, the lights of the ship guiding our way. From what I remember, we were able to find a nice hiding spot, close enough to get a good look at the UFO, but just far enough away to maintain the illusion of safety. As we knelt behind some brush, Tina let out a small fart, just a little squeak, but it must have embarrassed her because she looked at me, a finger to her lips as if I were to blame. Luckily, we were not noticed. We did not have to wait long for the action to start. A ramp extended from the spacecraft, and out came a flock of Bigfoots, or Big Feet. I'll just call them Bigfoots. Not just one, mind you, but a whole stinking mess of them. Honestly, the place was just lousy with the things. There must have been 30 or more. They came lumbering out as graceful as, well, I don't know, hippos, I guess. Fat, stinking hippos. They headed off towards the river, passing no more than 15 or 20 feet from us. We could hear them quite clearly, chattering amongst themselves, sounding like a cross between sick teamsters and drunken camels. It was a strange language indeed. For Bigfoots, they were rather small. If I remember right, the larger ones, the males I suppose, stood only about 6, maybe 7 feet tall, and stranger still, their feet appeared to be pretty average for their size. I'm guessing that most of them would be plenty comfortable in a size 12 or 13 shoe. But the most noticeable thing about them was their smell. My God, it was awful. Just imagine pulling a dead raccoon from a vat of rotten eggs, or maybe a basket of hamsters after weeks spent submerged in spoiled milk. Maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but the stench was truly unholy. I know most folks are thinking, Blah blah, another St. Hubba's Day story, Bigfoots, UFOs, so what? But things were about to get a lot more stupid. Tina was hell-bent on following these horrible creatures, ignoring my pleas to turn around and go home, but she was now on a mission, and there was no stopping her. She took a big swig from the bottle and tossed the empty at a passing squirrel. Yes, she hated them too. She also despised bunny rabbits, but just the cute baby ones. Now, ordinarily, I'd have suggested she slow down on the hooch, but seeing a UFO unload Bigfoots tended to throw logic out the window. So off we went, deeper into the woods, chasing after these stinking apes like a couple of bumbling idiots. The forest was alive with the sound of our stumbling, Tina's occasional toot, and branches snapping underfoot as we tried to keep pace with our newfound friends. We finally caught up with them in a clearing where they had gathered around some sort of crater or pit. Tina, in her drunken wisdom, decided that now would be a good time to make introductions. She flicked what was left of her cigarette to the ground and stumbled forward, a beacon of goodwill and alcohol-fueled courage. "Hello there," she belched, her voice a little too loud for the occasion. "We come in peace." Two of the creatures, I think they may have been females, glared at Tina menacingly, their eyes wide with, well, menace. The rest of them looked at us with, it's hard to say, confusion maybe, or hunger. Yes, it was definitely hunger. Anyway, if I remember right, one of them, a particularly large beast with a makeshift crown of twigs atop its ugly head, stepped forward. He regarded us suspiciously, moving his eyes from our heads to our toes, deciding whether or not we were a threat. Then his lips curled into what could have been a smile, or maybe a snarl. It was hard to tell. Tina, bless her stupid heart, took this as a sign of acceptance. She reached out a hand, offering it in friendship. "I'm Tina," she burped, her words a little too slurred to understand. Then it sounded like she may have said, "And this is my husband Gary," or "My address hands me berries." I'm not really sure. I tried to interject, to warn her of the folly of befriending strange alien creatures, especially those that smelled like they'd been crapped out of a crocodile's stink hole. But it was too late. The Bigfoot leader, or whatever it was, took Tina's hand in his own. His grip looked to be surprisingly gentle. For a moment, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, this crazy encounter would end in something resembling a heartwarming tale of interspecies friendship. A beautiful TV moment, stink apes and people holding hands across the nation, lip-syncing some idiotic song about peace and love. And then he gently bit her head off. I wish I could say I reacted heroically, that I did not crap my pants, that I fought tooth and nail to save my beloved wife from becoming Sasquatch poop. But the truth is, I ran like a drunken gazelle, my heart pounding in my chest like a bass drum at a speed metal concert. Sometime later, I found myself huddled in the safety of my home, nursing a bottle of whiskey like it was the only bottle of whiskey I had left in the world. The authorities will come looking for answers, I'm sure. But what can I tell them? That my wife was devoured by stinkfoots? No, it's better this way. Let them think it was a tragic accident, a chance encounter with a wood chipper, or maybe a knife fight with a grizzly bear. Let them keep their illusions of safety and sanity. As for me, I'll raise a glass to Tina's memory tonight and every St. Hubba's Day, sometimes even in the mornings before work. Hell, I may even make time to drink on my lunch breaks because I love that woman so much. I will drink to her memory. I will drink to honor my dear wife, a beautiful girl who dared to befriend monsters. I believe with all my heart that Tina is in a better place now. A place where Bigfoots are few and far between. A happy, magical paradise, free of annoying puppies, a blissful Eden, where everyone can enjoy the holidays without having their heads ripped off. I will forever love her and know that we will be together again someday.
Come visit the Atomic Skull and check out our great selection of awe-inspiring gifts from around the multiverse. Only the most extraordinary items make it to our shelves. You'll shout, "Holy shit," when you see what we offer, from awesome t-shirts and crazy coffee mugs to groovy hippie stuff and trippy tote bags, we have it all. So remember, theatomicskull.com, we rock. Everyone else sucks.
Pete sat on the porch of his modest cabin. The crisp Wisconsin air permeated with the scent of earth and pine. He sipped his morning coffee, gazing out at the sprawling expanse of his land, the Nicolet forest looming in the distance. At 73 years old, he had seen his fair share of life's ups and downs. A veteran of the Vietnam War, he had returned home with a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star, but also with scars that ran deeper than any metal could mend. Memories of the war often haunted his quiet moments, casting shadows over the tranquility of his surroundings. His closest neighbor, Brian, lived about a mile to the west, a fellow Army veteran and a survivalist, always prepared for whatever the world might throw his way. Pete respected Brian's self-sufficiency and considered him a friend, someone to be trusted. They shared a bond forged in the crucible of combat, an unspoken understanding that transcended words. To the east lived Greg, a real estate investor and self-described prepper. Greg's enthusiasm for his work often spilled over into his interactions with others. He was always trying to make a deal, and it was getting old. Despite Greg's persistence, Pete couldn't help but admire his dedication. A man had to make a living after all, and he was good at his job. Greg's wife, Vicky, provided a soothing contrast to her husband's exuberance, her gentle demeanor a welcome presence in the town. Pete's constant companions were his two huskies, Odin and Thor, born of the same litter. Thor was as loyal as they came, his steady gaze a silent reassurance in troubled times. Odin, with his mischievous nature, added a touch of spontaneity to Pete's otherwise predictable routine. On most days, he would venture out on long walks with his dogs, exploring the old dirt roads that weaved and twisted through the forest, discovering long abandoned paths, all but invisible to the untrained eye, and new trails forged by deer. These trails often led to spring-fed streams and forgotten caves. Depending on the weather, they might be gone for 8 hours or more, losing track of time as they roamed the wilderness. But on this particular evening, as dusk settled over the land, his routine would be shattered by an unexpected turn of events. As the sun began to disappear behind the pines, he turned back towards home. Night came fast this time of year, and he was getting hungry. Just then, the dogs, who were normally calm and composed, suddenly grew restless, their senses alert to something that he couldn't perceive. He frowned, wondering what was upsetting the dogs as he scanned the horizon for any sign of trouble. That's when he caught it, a terrible odor, foul and acrid, drifting through the air. A skunk, he thought. Pete wrinkled his nose in disgust, his senses on high alert as he tried to pinpoint the source of the stench. But before he could make sense of it, Thor and Odin were off like a shot, their barks echoing through the forest as they chased after something unseen. Pete called out to them, his voice tinged with concern, but they paid him no heed, their instincts driving them forward with an urgency intrinsic to their nature. A few minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by the distant sounds of the dogs' pursuit. And then, just as Pete was about to follow them into the forest, a spine-chilling howl shattered the stillness, freezing him in his tracks. It sounded monstrous, almost like a wolf in pain, yet somehow more fierce, a primal scream that sent shivers down his spine and set his heart pounding. He stood rooted to the spot, his mind racing as he weighed his options. He was not a young man anymore, and fighting off wolves or staring down a cougar seemed like a bad way to end the day. In the end, logic won out over curiosity, and he wisely turned back, breaking into a brisk jog as he made his way to the safety of his cabin. He prayed that the dogs would return to him unharmed, but deep down, he knew that something was terribly wrong in the heart of the forest. As darkness fell, Pete couldn't shake the feeling that he had just experienced something strange and sinister. Shotgun in hand, Pete waited for his dogs to return. Hours went by, but there was no sign of them, and his heart ached at the thought that they may have come to harm. He fell asleep sometime around midnight and awoke soon after to that horrible howling. He jumped up from his chair and stared into the inky darkness. It had come from the west, towards Brian's place. Nothing much scared old Pete, but he was scared now for sure. Around 7 a.m., he got a call from Brian. Brian said that he had heard barking coming from the forest and thought that it could have been one of Pete's dogs. This happened around 3 this morning. He went on to say that he had been awakened by barking and howling, and when he looked out his bedroom window, he saw a strangely painted service van or something racing like hell out on the old public access road. It looked to be heading towards the ranger station. Pete thought this was quite odd, as the area was very remote. Brian also mentioned that he thought he may have caught a glimpse of a large black bear lurking just past the road, but he was quite dark and could not be sure. He thought it was kind of strange and wanted to alert Pete because he knew that he liked to hike in that area. Later that day, Pete walked out towards the forest, hoping to find his dogs, and encountered Brian riding around in his pickup. He too was scouting the area. Brian offered him a ride and they drove around the forest looking for the dogs. While searching, they came across what they believed to be Greg's Jeep, parked on the main trail not 50 yards from the ranger's station. They approached it curiously, but Greg was nowhere to be seen. After 10 minutes or so, a van came down the dirt road and pulled up next to them. It was the same strange van that Brian had seen earlier that morning. The driver rolled down his window and asked them if they had seen a large dog wandering around. After telling the driver about his own dogs and the howling, Pete asked the driver who he was and how he had come to lose his dog. The man opened the van door and got out. Pete could see that the man was not alone. There were at least 2 more people in the van, but they did not get out. "I'm Fred," he said. "My crew and I were hired by one of your neighbors, a Mr. Healy. He owns the farm just south of here, past the county road." Brian knew of him, but they had never met. Fred went on to say that his employer had lost several cows and had a fence pulled apart. He wanted to find out what the hell was going on. He went on to say that although they had heard no mention of any howling, there were rumors of a large bear roaming about at night causing mischief, and there have been a few reports of mailboxes being damaged and bird feeders smashed. Fred then said that while they were out looking for whatever it may have been that made off with the livestock, they had found some tracks which had led them in this direction, and that was when their dog caught the scent of something and ran off into the woods. Pete said, "That was just what my dogs had done. In fact, we are searching for them now." Brian joked, "So you guys are like the A-team?" Fred chuckled at the comparison, then replied, "Sort of, but we shoot first and we don't miss." Brian couldn't help but smile at the boast. Fred asked if they would mind if his crew continued to search for their dog, and although both Brian and Pete had reservations about strangers on their land, they both agreed that he was welcome to look. Fred thanked them and said that his crew would keep an eye out for Pete's dogs and would let them know if they spot them. Then he said something odd. He asked the men if they had seen anything strange walking around the forest. "Like what?" Pete asked. "Well," Fred said, "kind of like a bear, but walking on 2 legs like a man." Brian demanded, "What the hell are you talking about?" Fred hesitated, then responded, "I'm well aware of how it sounds, but we've received reports, rumors mostly, of something resembling a werewolf or maybe Bigfoot in and around the forest." Brian scoffed at this and let out a small laugh. "It's a bear," he said. "I saw one this morning. It must have been a bear." But he sounded a little unsure. Pete pondered silently, considering what he had heard the night before and feeling a sense of unease creep over him. They returned to the cabin where Brian was invited in for a drink, a somewhat rare occurrence for Pete, who didn't indulge often. But when he did, it was usually with Brian. The 2 men shared hearty laughter about Fred's wild theory of a roaming monster, though their amusement was tinged with nervousness and discomfort. Brian couldn't resist poking fun at Fred's crazy-looking van and his cringe-worthy bravado. Pete decided to call Greg's place to ensure everything was all right. Vicky answered on the first ring, her voice tinged with worry. She mentioned that she had been trying to reach her husband for a few hours. Given the nature of Greg's job, his absence wasn't necessarily cause for alarm. However, Vicky's concern heightened upon learning that his Jeep may have been left in the forest. Despite her unease, she assured Pete that she would keep trying his phone. She noted that if Greg was indeed in the forest, he might be hard to reach due to poor cell service in that area. She promised to call back if she managed to get a hold of him. Deciding it was still early enough to make another search, they grabbed a thermos of coffee and headed out. It was decided that using the ranger's tower would provide a better vantage point, but the thick canopy of trees obscured much of their view. As they were about to leave the tower, Pete caught sight of something strange, a distant figure partially hidden by brush. He swore it resembled a large black bear walking on its hind legs. Brian tried to spot the creature but was too late. It had vanished into the woods. The two men then descended from the watchtower and were about to drive off when they spotted Odin coming towards them, sniffing the ground as he walked. Pete called out to him, visibly relieved to see him again. Then Thor came into view and trotted over to join them. Both huskies were covered in blood and appeared to have been in a fight. They were carefully helped into the truck and taken back to the cabin. After washing the dogs, they noticed that both had sustained wounds from a skirmish, though none were life-threatening. Pete decided it would be prudent to have a vet examine them in the morning, but for now, he would administer some antibiotics and gabapentin to help them rest and recover. "Well, it looks like your dogs found the bear," Brian said. "They're lucky to be alive." Pete's phone buzzed and he glanced at the screen to see Vicky's name flashing. Her voice sounded urgent as she explained her struggle to reach Greg. "Could you check the area again?" she pleaded, a hint of worry creeping into her tone. Agreeing to help, Pete and Brian wasted no time. With dusk approaching, they jumped into the truck and raced back out. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows, they found the Jeep still parked in its spot. Scanning the area, they called out for Greg, their voices echoing through the forest. But there came no answer, and that's when they spotted it. At first glance, they mistook it for a bear, but as it drew nearer, its shape became unmistakable. Brian stared in disbelief. "Impossible," he muttered, reaching for his rifle, but it wasn't there. They'd forgotten it in their haste. The creature loomed closer, its outline illuminated by the headlights of Fred's van. With a skid, the van came to a halt. Fred and his 3 associates leaped out, shotguns at the ready. In a flurry of action, they unleashed a barrage of gunfire, tearing the creature apart. When the smoke had cleared, Fred cautiously approached the gruesome remains of the monster. However, upon closer inspection, he froze, his expression shifting to one of alarm. One of his crew members, a blonde woman in her mid-30s, called out, "What's the matter?" Her voice filled with urgency. "What did you find?" Ignoring Fred's distress, she strode past him and knelt beside the body. "What is that?" she said before kneeling down and grabbing at its head. It looked to Pete as if she was pulling its face off, but it soon became clear that it was a mask, and beneath the mask was the remains of what appeared to be Greg's face. Fred tried to hold back his puke, but only succeeded in forcing it from between his fingers, spraying Brian's corpse and the woman in a voluminous stream of vomit. When the sheriff had finished his investigation, it was determined that Greg had been scheming to frighten some of the locals into selling him their land and figured this was a good way to do it. And if it wasn't for Fred and his 3 companions, he would have gotten away with it too. As for Fred's missing dog, he was found dead, torn to shreds, reduced to a pile of flesh and bone. The dog had to be identified by his tags. Regarding the howling sounds Pete heard, it was reasoned that it must have been Fred's dog, howling in pain after being mortally wounded by a pack of wolves, a bear, or most likely a werewolf. He then managed to make it about 100 yards before whatever it was returned to finish the job. It must have been a horrifying death. It was presumed that Odin and Thor had joined the fight, but had the luck to escape. A few days later, Fred and his crew, having been cleared of any wrongdoing, came to the cabin. They pulled up in their mystery van and gave Pete a bag of stuff they thought he might be able to use. One of Fred's employees, a scruffy-looking hippie type, said that he hoped his dogs could use some of the items, as they would have no more use for them. Inside the bag was a leather leash, a rubber squeaky ball, 2 bags of doggy snacks, and a dog brush. The brush was like new. It still had the tag on it. Epilogue. 2 months later, Brian and Vicky fell in love, and after a short engagement, they were married. Not wanting to leave old Pete out in the cold, they completed their little family by adopting him. And of course the dogs too, as they were a package deal. and they lived happily for a while until AI came to power and threatened to destroy the world. But that's another true-ish tale from a stupid universe or something.
Thanks for watching this crappy video. And please hit the like button, or no one will like you.